Just real quick before we go ahead and jump on into the Wheel of Time Season 2 Episode 8 review, I would like to pretend to read something very quickly. No, I am not going to let Matt Hatch's more positive view on this episode affect me, and no, I'm not going to let Sanderson's slightly more negative view affect me. I'm my own independent man who can, believe it or not, form his own opinions like it's my profession. In all seriousness though, thank you so much for the Sanderson team for inviting me out to watch episode 8. That was an absolute blast, and it's just always cool to be able to hang out with the author of the most important fantasy series of my life, co-author, and that was super cool. Check out our live stream if you have not already. It was, I would say, friendly contentious, which is just what I hope, we are able to maintain in the comments section on YouTube. For me though, episode 8 is going to be my least favorite of season 2, but far from my least favorite for the series as a whole. I stand by what the title of this video is going to be. It's a good season of Wheel of Time, and I'm actually far more hopeful for the potential of the series as a whole moving forward into season 3, but there is just so clearly a need for 12 episodes for this show to thrive. I'm going to get more into that with my season 2 full review that will be dropping hopefully within the week, but 8 episodes just seems inherently too constraining to be able to tell any of the Wheel of Time books, let alone the big old event chunkers of the last like 4 or so. And we know the intent of Wheel of Time is not to get a full 14 seasons, so already having these constraint issues with a greater need for condensing down the road definitely has me also nervous for seasons going forward. But we're on an upward trajectory overall. Let's leave the rest of that discussion for the season review and go ahead and talk about the events of episode 8 in the same format I have been, where I talk about my least favorite through line to my favorite. And my least favorite is going to be fairly obvious, I feel, this episode, and that's going to be Elayne and Nynaeve. This is just such a unfortunate wet fart of an ending for a plotline that overall was on the stronger side for me. Elayne and Nynaeve, I thought the performances from beginning to end had exactly the chemistry I wanted between the two, and how they were set up to hopefully play a part in freeing Egwene as they do in the books was riding closer to the books than I expected going into this season. It's just at the end, and no, not even the end. The big chunk of their events in this episode has nothing to do with freeing Egwene, and instead we see them just torturing a Suldam for a little bit, Elayne and Nynaeve walking through the city, Elayne getting shot in the knee from an archer who was never addressed or dealt with in any capacity, and should have certainly kept shooting at Nynaeve, who's dressed up like the Suldam he's fighting, and then we have Nynaeve for what feels like a large span of time, kneeling over Elayne, trying to heal her, and not pulling her in an alley to safety, just in the middle of a battle, which, yeah, there's a lot of editing in this episode that you have to assume events are happening simultaneously, but they are sitting there for a huge chunk of the episode, so it's just such a bizarre disservice to the narrative of these characters for this to be what they're doing in the big climax, let alone the fact that Nynaeve isn't able to heal Elayne, which I feel like could have very easily been justified with her block here in the text. And then we have Elayne get an arrow shoved out of her knee and somehow in time make it to a top of a tower with Nynaeve to then heal Rand. We don't even get Nynaeve healing Rand, which I feel like, again, could have easily been justified with Nynaeve's block, which in the books is overcome with anger. I understand for certain reasons why you wouldn't have put that as overtly in the show, but Nynaeve still clearly does have a workaround for her block we've seen in this season. So this one, just a big miss. There was pretty much not one choice I liked here for the writing of these two. Aside from just saying the costuming for Nynaeve as a Suldam, banger. She looked great, and the costuming for this show as a whole has just been on that next level. Next up, we have Moiraine and Lan. And this is one where I feel like if you are not a book fan, it'll probably be far higher for you. And I want to completely acknowledge that and even give the writers the grace of saying, I understand that you are not trying to address every bit of magic continuity from the books and liberties absolutely need to be taken here. For me, it's just the liberties were too far. Essentially, we see Moiraine and Lan are set up with Lanfear to be shoved out of the ways, which we saw them walk off with Lanfear in the last episode, and they end up on a beach close enough by to once again get involved with the combat. And then there's just Shan-Chan that show up, I assume, who are at an outpost that heard of the battle that were coming back and happened to run into Lan and Moiraine. And then we see Lan take on the Shan-Chan, and Moiraine power far exceed where I thought it would be in the show, as she's able to take out an entire fleet of channelers from a distance of what looked like somewhere between a few hundred yards and like between half a mile and a mile. Like, I'm very bad at distances, so don't quote me on that. And if you don't know of the constraints that should be there from the book, I can see this just being like a cool Moiraine moment. It does make me think, why did she struggle at all at Winter's Night, which seemed to be a much easier set of channeling, especially with how distance is supposed to make channeling substantially harder. And you do kind of end up wondering why none of the Shan-Chan felt that incredible amount of power coming and did anything to stop it. We do get some Lan cool fight choreography stuff. An archer who, after 2 shots, fortunately for Lan, just decides to retire and go home. I'm kidding. You have to just like fill in the blank, assume Moiraine turned around and took him out or something at some point off camera, letting that go. I do just think, like, outside of serious review brain, from like hyper overcritical brain, it's funny that in the language the show communicates, that guy shoots twice, Lan catches both, and then he's like, you know what? Seems like my arrows are just killing my friends. I'm gonna bounce. And this is unfortunately an episode that, despite Moiraine having some interesting stuff with her family earlier on in the season, just overall is weaker for both of them. Here, the relationship between Lan and Moiraine, petty squabble, and a line delivered in a way that just felt totally unjustified of, the only reason I was able to say that we are need equals is because you're my better. It's not working. There was just no cohesion for pretty much any of the chemistry they were trying to have drama with. And Sanderson, I actually disagree with him a few things in this episode during our chat. It was kind of hard to like push back aggressively when you're sitting next to a guy who wrote some of the books, but I'll bring those up more thoroughly later. But one thing I did agree with his commentary on for this episode is the lack of arcs, and instead trying to substitute cool scenes. And I feel like the best case for that argument is this beach scene with Moiraine and Lan, where there's an attempt at an arc that didn't personally work for me, and a very cool action set piece for Lan that shows you, yes, how badass he is, but I would have rather had Lan and Moiraine tied in a way that felt more high stakes for our main 5, instead of just at such an extreme distance doing something that felt so disconnected yet still directly involved. Finishing off that thought, which I somehow forgot to do in the original recording, and their conflict somehow tied into the wider themes of the season that became relevant to how, you know, all of the characters are connecting with each other and overcoming the final challenges. Instead, it just feels like, oh, they're playing a part in Lanfear's plan and nothing else. Next up, I really want to talk about Mat in this episode, because yes, I do have so many things I want to say from a book perspective, and we really got into that in depth in our chat after the episode, so I don't want to spend too much time on that here because I don't want to be sounding redundant for you all. But Mat is locked in a room with the dagger by Fane, and Ishamael's play here to try and get Rand to join the Shadow by corrupting people like Mat, I actually like quite a bit as a setup. That feels like an Ishamael play, and the buildup we've had for Mat works into it for just actually the story of the episode, and in a way kind of respecting some things from the books that were tweaked for season 1 and are trying to correct course here for season 2. And then we get Mat and Fane in a room together where Fane is trying to tempt Mat with the dagger, and so we're having Fane's relationship with the dagger just be very different here. Season review, we'll talk about this, but Mat ends up alone in the room with the dagger, and it's cool. I like having this temptation. I'm not a big fan of his solution because he pushes it off the table, takes like a cloth metaphorically equivalent to a Kleenex, puts it, ties it, and makes his Ashen Darai. And I have a litany of hardcore nerd reasons why this dispels so much of the aura around the dagger. It makes it feel so much less intense. I think Matt Hatch in our discussion had a point where he's like, look, you don't just touch the dagger once and become super glued to it. Like we see Rand, I believe, touch it in book 2 briefly, and it's more about time exposed. But my argument would be then like, well, he's still being around it. It's still right there, and it's going to... even in the room, it's being communicated to us with the editing that just being there next to it is painful, but I guess putting it at the end of this spear makes it less so. I will have less of a problem with this, despite it just being goofy on face value for me, if the dagger is taken from him by Aes Sedai and he gets an actual Ashendari later. That's better. And this was just the show's way of showing him overcoming the temptation of the shadow and even mastering it in a way by tying it on the stick. I still have book reasons. Like, it's one of those things where if the switch flips, I go from being like whatever about it to negative on it. Let's just move on though with Matt, where he gets out of the cell, he stabs a guy, and I actually had a problem at first, I thought, with him suddenly being really good with the Ashendari, but I was wrong on my first viewing. There was people talking, please forgive. And on the second viewing, I don't think he's shown to be talented with the Ashendari. He just stabs a guy and runs off. That doesn't take skill. And it's not until, yes, he runs into Perrin, they have their meetup, Matt runs off with the horn to try and get it to Rand, and ends up blowing it, and he says, I remember. Then Matt is shown to have skill that on par with soldiers with that weapon. So I actually think there is no issue with his skill gap there. And the emotions from Matt on my second viewing of this episode actually gave me goosebumps. This might have been the show's strongest emotional arc aside from Egwene, where we see one of the horns tell him he is a hero, and the elation, the relief within Matt, it actually gave me goosebumps. The performance brought to this character by both actors has been great, but I really think is exceeding expectations in season 2. The horn, though, itself, apparently, from the conversations I had with Sanderson, he fought really hard for the horn to get blown when he was talking with people in the show about the scripts. I actually disagree with that choice. Blasphemous, I know, hear me out. All personal preference, of course, but the horn in the book is played up quite a bit more. And you come to just small mentions here and there, understand who many of the heroes are. There have been mentions of heroes of the horn, I believe, in the show, but it hasn't had that same weight. It hasn't had that same narrative value. And so I personally would have rather seen it just lifted out. Now I kind of regret saying this as I'm editing the video. I'm very of two minds on it, where for me, just total fanboy, it was cool, and I really liked that full arc of Matt that I even kind of called in my last review, where like he realizes, no, I am a hero. I can be a hero. But I'm just concerned for people who haven't read the book of like, there's like, who are these people? What's going on? But I'm actually not in their head, and I'm assuming that would be an issue. I don't know for sure, so I don't know. I'm going to have to rewatch the entire season, which I'm going to do. Though you have the question then of how is Matt supposed to remember these things, have that part of his character worked in, and so I get why it still happened. It's something I'm very conflicted about, and I'll try and get my feelings more settled on before I do a season review. Once the horn is blown, though, I would have suspected they would have emphasized one specific archer more than Arthur Hawkwing, which I get you would do that with the Shan-Chan there, but for me, for reasons I won't get into, there is a particular hero archer I would have had a lot of the emphasis on. I believe we definitely do see her, it's just she's not the one speaking. Just to get it in viewers who haven't read the book's head that, oh, there is a specific person that's a hero, look at them, remember them. Perrin has some of the same issue he's had all season. The bulk of his screen time is just walking. We even see him say stay to Hopper before he gets in the city. Walks in, manages to meet up with Loyal, who somehow has the horn. There's a thing about it not having much security around it, and we just have to not see it get taken. We fill in the blank. I get there's like a major runtime concern. That's why, again, 12 episodes. Even if you loved this episode, which if you do, I'm jealous of you, great. I think everyone can universally agree this show would benefit from more screen time to, especially as they're trying to correct course from a lot of the issues that were out of the control they had to handle from season 1, to breathe, to give us those moments that would allow the reader to not only have greater experience with certain side characters like Loyal, who I feel like wasn't given enough this season, but also get moments that feel narratively important. The big important part of Perrin's piece of the story is how he runs into Whitecloaks, he fights alongside them at first, and all of this, actually the Whitecloaks as a whole were a part of the episode I very much so enjoyed. We'll talk about that more in a minute. And Perrin's fighting alongside some and inevitable clash with others. One, it represents the duality of the good and bad of the zealotry of the Whitecloaks sensationally, which is kind of the point of this whole battle in the books, where like, yes, Whitecloaks try to serve the light, they just do it in the worst way possible, and it really just depends on who's in charge, how much good versus bad they're doing. Granted, I kind of just hate Whitecloaks as a whole, but this all comes to a head with Eamon Valda finding Perrin, them having a bit of a fight, Hopper coming out of pretty much nowhere to save Perrin and then getting killed by Dane Bornhold's father. And there was a criticism we had in the discussion where at first, and I agreed, and I actually want to take that back, where it was, oh, I like how Eamon Valda just ran off after Hopper was killed and didn't try to keep fighting Perrin. I actually think that would be totally believable, his choice, because he just got mauled by a dog. He's holding his arm. I wouldn't want to fight giant Perrin either right after I get wounded by a dog. I GTFO. But then Perrin has his reaction to Hopper's death, which is to kill Dane Bornhold's father. Jeffrey Bornhold. I want to call him Jeff Bornhold. That's not right. What is it? Jeffrey Bornhold. Jesus. And so overall for Perrin, the stakes were just astronomically low this season. He is just meandering his way through this season, almost literally. The setup for season 3, though, for him is extremely promising because there is a profoundly interesting conflict between Perrin and the Whitecloaks in the books, and with the Whitecloaks being handled so well in this episode overall, and Perrin finally being positioned in a place where Marcus Rutherford is going to be able to really, hopefully be able to bring something to the character, I am surprisingly very excited to see how that's going to play out in season 3. Judging from the changes in how things are set right now, it seems like that big conflict, which is a bit later in the books, I would predict is going to be happening in season 3. But then Uno shows up because he's a person in the horn, which I actually didn't like. It felt unearned. Uno wasn't a big enough player. His sacrifice not quite presented heroic enough. But because of this, Perrin ends up with a shield, and I don't know why. There are shield issues in this show, but this shield is given importance that in no way, shape, or form I feel like is deserved. We're going to talk about that more in a minute. And then Perrin heads off to go find Rand, and we'll talk about the biggest issue with this episode, the Tower, after we get through probably the best parts of this episode. Next up, Rand al'Thor. Again, another thing I disagree with, because Rand in the books does draw a sword in this moment where the High Lord from the Shan-Chan comes out and duels a fellow Blade Master. In our talk, I'm gonna firmly plant myself here. Sanderson said Rand was tutored by the greatest swordsman in history for, however long we have between book 1 and 2. The whole series is only a few years, so it's not that long. And he gets good enough that while in the void and being a Tal'Viran is able to defeat this Blade Master. It's certainly something you can believe in the books. I think it would have been a massive mistake for the show to have Rand, who we haven't really seen trained by Land, pull out his sword and fight this High Lord. And that would have been a gargantuan mistake, especially with how many constraints they're having with time right now. So I like the Indiana Jones style solution, where he just goes, all right, and wipes them all out. It saves time, gives more moments for other plot lines, and yeah, like even this interpretation of Rand's character, I don't think he's ever shown a big enough inkling toward honor or anything along those lines to feel like he would feel the need to draw that sword and fight this man right now. He's trying to save one of his friends. He just wants to get to Egwene and punish these people who he feel has wronged someone he cares about. Yeah, that actually, I think, wouldn't be the best change in the book, but especially for this show was the right call. And just to top off my argument against what Sanderson said, I can't believe I'm saying that. It is weird to argue against points made by someone who, wrote in the series. You can be trained for a year by the best at something, absolutely, and still not be good enough to take on someone who has spent a lifetime honing their skills. If Muhammad Ali in his prime trained me for a year, I would not be able to take on Mike Tyson in their prime. How many years of tutelage under Muhammad Ali would Daniel need to fight Mike Tyson? Infinite is the answer. Let's move on from that, though. It's a moot point. I think I actually should have put Rand a little lower on the list here, because now that I'm looking back at my notes, he doesn't do a whole lot until he's on the tower, and I have so many issues with the tower. We're going to talk about the tower at the end. Let's talk about Egwene. Because despite mostly being on the tower this episode, Egwene's stuff still largely landed. There's so many technical things with the power I can complain about here, but I've done enough of that. I just want to say the performance from Madeline Madden, the relationship between her and her Suldam, who I keep wanting to call Renee, that's not right. It's so personal, it's so visceral, that even this kind of confusing end where it's like, why was she able to do that? Who that? Still love it. I still even love that because this is a more arguably brutal version of her Suldam than we get in the book, Egwene just watches her die. Whoa. Trebuchets, sure, kind of came out of nowhere, but a siege is happening, and there's dusty children making it hard to see the siege weapon. Before we get in the actual tower, though, the Forsaken, again, just great. Seen all the episodes twice now. Lanfear and Ishmael's play back and forth subtly throughout the season is one of the strongest. How they are overtly betraying each other, yet still playing like best friends, which is something that Moiraine backs up with how they were so close with Luz. And the opening of this episode, which I could have taken or left, Ishmael, Lanfear, their chemistry, and even how, despite my issues with the very end here, their two plans converge at the end, I like a lot. These Forsaken are more competent than the Forsaken we got in the books. Flat out. I thought Ishmael not being mad at this point in the series was going to bring up more and more questions about why he wasn't doing certain things, but they were able to narratively show he wants someone who was his friend to join the Shadow. That's why he's been playing the way he has. It works. And then finally, amazingly, didn't see this coming, just the Whitecloaks. I want to give a shout out to, they feel like the most interesting villain aside from the Forsaken for the show now. I really like the setup for Dane, and I don't normally do this. I want to just say, and their aesthetic is fantastic. I even like the children with the dust covering the charge, which could be argued against for so many obnoxious reasons. But rule of cool, the imagery of the kids with these things and how it plays out, yeah, I'm not going to do any of that. I'm just going to go, all right, turning that critical part of my brain off, letting the fanboy have a moment. Neat. Though, if I'm going to be praising that, I need to point something out that, especially on a second watch, drove me insane. And that would be the behavior of background actors at fundamental parts of high stakes. First, yes, for things like Nynaeve and Elayne just sitting on the ground in the middle of a battle, if you look closely in the background, there's people running around that are clearly just kind of like running from destination to destination. I can let a lot of that go. But later on, when Elaine's actually up with Nynaeve, there's people who are just walking like they're going to a target. And it's like there's fire and magic wizards blowing stuff up within a block of you. And you're just direct your background actors more. It's not the background actors' fault. They're there for a day rate and they just do what they're told and the camera's not focused on them. Whoever was telling them to do what they needed to do utterly dropped the ball because there is such a lack of panic in the background actors at certain points in my second watch. I was like, wait, is the battle over yet right now narratively? No, not at all. And then there's the point after the main events in the tower we're gonna get to where Lanfear's standing with some of them and the background actors, despite them cheering and being like, yeah, I'm wondering, why are you standing there cheering yeah when you're seeing a giant fire dragon? For all you know, the battle's still ongoing, and yes, people are retreating, but like probably a whole bunch of your loved ones are dead, your homes may be on fire, and you don't know that this is necessarily a good thing, and you're just overwhelmingly like, ah! But okay, let's get to the tower. The climax of this episode largely takes place on a tower that Egwene was on with the other Suldam Damani. And after a trebuchet statistically, amazingly manages to knock everybody out except for Egwene and her Suldam, who Egwene then kills. Rand just kind of wanders in. They are then confronted by Ashamael. Egwene is knocked out and Rand is blocked due to the quote-unquote trap Ashamael's been planning, which is why Egwene, the most powerful channeler the Shan-Chan have, isn't out on the boats with the other most powerful channelers who are holding this shield and is instead on the tower. Rand rejects Ashamael's plea for him to join the Shadows so that his friends won't. Rand gives what I think is actually a good lore moment of talking about how in 1,000 lives I know I've never served him and I'm not going to now. Good. Yes, Sanderson absolutely had a point with one of the largest themes of Wheel of Time is the reason the light is able to defeat the dark is the fact that you have your friends, the people who will not betray you, which the Forsaken can't have inherently because of who they are. It's just that everything here forward tries to ram that in without earning it this season. Mat shows up, throws the Ashendire with the blade, which then goes through the illusion of Ashamael, which I guess is like his go-to move. We've seen a lot of illusion of Ashamael's in this show. And then Ashamael says something I feel like is totally out of character for him, where he's like, how could you not see such a simple illusion? Ashamael, you know he can't channel, and your illusion is genuinely perfect. It holds up in 4K. You shouldn't have been like, why would you fall for that, nerd? He obviously would have fallen for that. He's just some country guy. And so things are looking bad for Rand. Egwene stands up to Ashamael. And do you remember how I said after a year of training, you shouldn't be able to take down Mike Tyson in his prime? Egwene just throws up a shield of some variety that stops every attack Ashamael can conceivably think of for what feels like 5 to 10 minutes. There's a reason I had these faces during that time. I think we have to infer that Ashamael was messing with Min's visions as well, though, because what we see happen with Rand getting stabbed by Mat doesn't line up with what the vision was from Min, so that was something played by Ashamael, I believe. As Egwene's shield is finally fully falling apart, though, Perrin arrives, and just jumps into the shield with his shield. And I missed this on my first viewing. There was people talking in my ear, which I loved. It was great to once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to get that specific commentary. But I kind of missed that Perrin is helping her physically hold the shield. If you rewatch the episode, his shield holding there is somehow also helping Egwene, because Egwene's shield was falling apart and she even apologized to Rand, like, I'm sorry, we're gonna die. And then Perrin is somehow actually supporting the one is it a power rot shield? I'd have to assume so, because he's from a Hero of a Horn. I can buy that. But like, why would it have this? It's just a lot of communication issues, which is something season 2 I believe is having trouble with, and that could be specifically for book fans, because for me, I'm left wondering about like the technicalities, because I'm a hyper super dork, for like why these things are occurring. But I'm sure if you haven't read the books and you're just don't care that much about like the nuances of a magic system, you're just enjoying it, I think like 70% of my criticisms will just be done away with. And there's even book nerds who I'm sure are just going to be like, yeah, this is another interpretation, I'm just going to enjoy it. I'm jealous of you. I have a hard time with that. More importantly though, something I want to get into very deeply in my series review, because I feel like it's one of the biggest flaws of this whole season, but we'll get there. There's just no emotional poignancy to Perrin reuniting with Egwene, or really many of the reunions here that are not happening with Mat. That's the one where there's usually some emotion, but like all this weird stuff from season 1 where they set up like a potential Perrin romance with Egwene despite his marriage and that being like an insecurity, these things that were devoted screen time to, you feel none of them here. And I just wish that maybe even Perrin's fridged Weiss for this show had had a moment of relevance this season. You just can't even argue that there was. She wasn't a thought, and that whole potential conflict between Perrin and Egwene Rand isn't a thought this season. And after this, Elayne and Nynaeve show up. I have no idea how Elayne, who just had an arrow actually rammed through her kneecap, is able to get here in this span of time. I guess we have to assume that their issue down on the ground didn't actually take all the time we see it chunked up to take in this episode, and was maybe like 45 seconds at the very beginning, and we just kept cutting back to that 45 seconds before they spend a long time getting to the top of this tower. But then how did Perrin not run into them when he just got up here, when he must have been going up the same stairs as them? Like, what? Just a whole lot of like the blocking of these events. Ugh. Elayne then heals Rand, not Nynaeve, and Rand gets his like, you're hot moment. It's strange to me anytime there's a life or death situation where someone takes a moment to be like, wow, bazoonga, bah! Love interest. Rand stands up and is then able to just walk forward and slowly stab one of the Forsaken. And you absolutely can, even in with Ashamael's philosophy, say he wanted to die. Because that's Ashamael's thing. He wants to break the wheel. He thinks existence is pain. He wants it all to stop. And he was in awe of Rand, you could say, and just let it happen. I will just push back and say, sure, that strikes me as particularly lazy. That is not something I believe for this character in this moment, that he's so in awe that he's just gonna let that happen. He's someone who's done a whole lot of scheming and planning, and it just really didn't jive with me. But his final line of kind of being at peace emotionally works. Then we have Moiraine make this big ass dragon, which at first I had a problem with, but with no setup for the dragon banner happening, yeah, that actually is a good enough substitute. I just wish it had breathed fire because it's a literal flaming dragon and not just hot gas. And this is where the episode ends. And the post-credits equivalent scene we get is seeing Lanfear smirking, kind of being like, yeah, my plan worked out great, running into Moghedien. And this is a very different than my head image of Moghedien, but with how they've portrayed Lanfear, having someone who feels so different from both Lanfear and Moghedien being the third Forsaken we see, sure, I'm not going to have that big of a problem with, especially because the person is chewing the scenery. It's being a bit campy in a way I like. And we see Lanfear kind of rattled for the first time, seeing the other Forsaken released, which if you want to put into someone who doesn't know what that means for like the threat level, seeing the most dangerous Forsaken be afraid the other Forsaken are out due to them being able to screw with her plans and stuff is a good way to go. Overall for me, sorry, this episode is just going to be at a 6 because I feel like the arcs, as Sanderson repeatedly noticed, the blocking, just so many of the moments that really asked for me to be like, this is your hero shot, feel good, emotionally fell flat. But I don't want people to take that as me saying like, oh, this season as a whole, pfft. No, I actually stand by the title of this episode. I think this is a good season for Wheel of Time on average. Especially with some of the whole plot lines from beginning to end, like Egwene, the closest one to the book, was having a blast. I think they accomplished a lot of what they were trying for, and I am more excited for season 3 than I was for season 2 because this is an upward trajectory. The cast is the right cast for this show. The writers just need more episodes and possibly to, I'm going to say it, respect source material information for my personal enjoyment, not necessarily yours more. Season 3 is going to be able to start off with less baggage from season 1 than season 2 had to deal with. So maybe those 8 episodes could provide a stronger landing. It's just unfortunate that twice in a row now, for my experience, we've seen Wheel of Time kind of stumble in its finale. Though, if this was a stumble, season 1 was a fall flat on the face. So yeah, even that is an improvement. And I'm really looking forward to, I guess, 2 years down the road from now, watching season 3. Oh, that made me sad to realize. But this was just my review of The Wheel of Time, season 2, episode 8. Thank you everyone for your patience and letting me do that awesome experience before getting you this review. In hindsight, I kind of wish we had all been able to just watch it separately and then provide commentary together with our experience of the episode. I'm not sure what making it a first live experience really added, but it was still so much fun. And Sanderson and his team are the most welcoming hosts. I can review a book of his negatively. I can do anything, and it just does not affect how I'm treated, which I think speaks a lot to him and his team. So lots of love to them. Go subscribe to their channel. Go subscribe to Matt Hatch as well. And you want an experience that's more kind of fanboy, doesn't have to be as critical as I try to be here with these reviews, where you gotta balance the fanboy and the critic. Much love, and keep the discussion going in the comments down below. Have a good one, y'all. Peace.